Hey everyone, I'm Zach Weiss, the co-founder of Worn and Wound, and today I'm going to be checking out the Tudor Black Bay 54, Tudor's biggest, or perhaps smallest, announcement from this year's Watches and Wonders. But before I do, I actually want to talk about this watch, the Black Bay 58, which was first announced 5 years ago at Bowser 2018. Rest in peace. You see, when Tudor announced this watch, the whole world collectively stopped and just said, wow. Literally the whole damn world. It was that big of a deal. Actually, in 2018, the Black Bay GMT was the focus of attention, the 58 being sort of an exciting side curiosity that us watch enthusiasts geeked out on. As much as the Tudor Black Bay line had earned a place in the hearts of enthusiasts for its retro sub styling, at 41 by 50 millimeters and nearly 15 millimeters in height with a 22 millimeter lug width, it wore like a medium to large modern diver. I liked its looks, but it just wasn't for me. And then Tudor dropped the Black Bay 58, a watch that at the time seemed unimaginable and answered all of our prayers. At 39 by 47.75 and 12 millimeters thick with 20 millimeter lugs, it was a dream come true. The closest modern watch in size and style to one of those coveted vintage subs that makes you drool but costs, more than a house. It was a dream come true on the wrist. Plus, it had Tudor's newish in-house Kanisi movement inside, a riveted step-tapered bracelet, which I'm still a big fan of, and maintained a 200-meter water resistance, all with a price tag under 4K. It was really hard to beat. I mean, it was a 39mm modern sub you could get. And while smaller divers are extremely common today, they were hard to come by in 2018, believe it or not, and especially if you wanted one from, a large Swiss luxury brand. Given the popularity of the watch on launch, we assumed that, like the Black Bay 41mm models, we'd see over the coming years a lot of variations on the watch in terms of bezel and dial combinations, maybe even some date complications, etc. Maybe it was because of the pandemic, or maybe it was always the strategy, but that rainbow of options, it just never really came. Okay, we got the blue one in 2020, which was a nice addition in my opinion, as it had a slightly more contemporary feel, but that was really it for steel Black Bay 58s, barring the Black Bay Pro, which, is sort of technically, its own thing. It's not really a 58. Then they dropped models in bronze, gold, and silver, which is still completely crazy, and then just moved on to different things altogether. And that brings us to 2023, a full 5 years after the launch of the Black Bay 58, which is a long time. I mean, that's all of high school, which I am pretty sure was actually an eternity. So surely at Watches and Wonders this year, we were finally going to see a return to the beloved 58 platform. But what we got was the Black Bay 54, which is not only a new model, it might actually be the one watch that could dethrone the Black Bay 58. Starting with the Black Bay 58, Tudor started pointing to specific archival references as inspiration. For the 58, it was the 7924 from, you guessed it, 1958. Perhaps they did this to feel safer about scaling it down a bit, as it didn't look too different from the larger models. Either way, they used the same logic on the 54, which is based on the reference 7922 from 1954, the first Tudor Submariner. Now, with both the 58 and 54 models, they gave themselves a lot of leeway with the details, particularly on the dials. But with the 54, they stayed truer to the case, at least in terms of dimensions, if not literally the design and shape. Unfortunately, I don't have a 7922 to compare with, so I can't really comment on the accuracy there. Anyway, I've been burying the lead this whole time. With the Black Bay 54, Tudor did the impossible again and made an even smaller, modern, vintage-inspired diver with a diameter of 37 millimeters. 37 millimeters! I mean, this is insane. I never thought we'd be seeing this outside of misguided attempts to gender watches by making some smaller than others, which, we do still see, but we're here, and it's great. And that's largely because the Black Bay 54 isn't just a smaller or scaled down version of the 58, like the way the 58 was from the 41mm models, where everything just came down in size. Rather, it has been entirely reproportioned, which is why I wonder how these two models will coexist. More on that later, though. I have some thoughts there. So we've got a 37mm diameter, and that includes the bezel. There's no overhang here. The lug to lug is then 45.8 millimeters, and it's 11.5 millimeters tall by my measurement. It also has 20 millimeter lugs, just like the 58. First, let's look at it on its own. 37 millimeters sounds small for a diver. I mean, vintage-inspired dress watches are often 38 millimeters. And divers can feel even smaller than their diameters suggest because they have smaller dial openings due to their bezels. This is mostly true when the dial and bezel aren't matching colors, or there's a strong visual break from something like a contrasting chapter ring or a pronounced metal rehaut. On the 54, and the 58 for that matter, the dial and the bezel match and flow fairly cleanly into each other. So in this instance, despite the smaller dial opening, the watch doesn't feel compressed at all. And then there's the 20mm lug width. At 37mm, it's totally fair for a watch to have 18 or 19mm lugs. It's to be expected, frankly, as a watch can begin to look boxy when the lug width is wide compared to the diameter, and it thus can just make the watch look larger. But instead of shying away from this, Tudor embraced it. That boxiness gives the 54 more presence on the wrist, as does simply having a wider strap or bracelet. This detail, more than others, really surprises me, as it really makes the 54 feel very similar to the 58 on the wrist. If they had just wanted to make a smaller dive watch option, I think they would have changed this. Now, it's also possibly accurate to the 7922, but they're kind of cavalier as to which details to keep and which to evolve for contemporary tastes and frankly their own branding motives. So they didn't have to keep this the same to call it the Black Bay 54. Moving on, while the 54 measures 11.5mm thick, I think they actually say it's 11.25, but I'm going to go off my own calibers here. It wears even thinner, and 11.5mm is already quite thin for a 200-meter dive watch. This is partly because of the domed sapphire crystal and the tool grip on the case back. They add about 1.5mm of height that disappears either visually or into your wrist when you're wearing it. But it's also because the mid case measures only around 5.4mm thick, which is about half a millimeter thinner than that of the Black Bay 58. Combined with the coin edge of the bezel, what you really feel like is on your wrist is, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8mm tall. I mean, it's lovely. Look, I own the Black Bay Pro, and I get that everyone thinks this watch is too thick, and I'm not going to deny that it is thick, but I still really like it. But I also really like a thin watch, and the 54 is so delightfully thin. I mean, the 58 is quite thin too. That was never an issue, but it's rare to find a steel sports watch that feels almost dress watch thin. It's honestly kind of hard to go back to thicker watches after wearing it, but let's get back on track. Another detail that I find has an overall effect on the sense of scale of the 54 is the crown. I don't think it's unfair to say that Tudor has leaned into larger crowns in general on their sports watches, and they also used to be known for their elongated crown tubes, many of which had contrasting colors to really stand out. As a side note, that was always kind of a strange flex, right? They were the only ones who did that, but they seem to have been phasing that out for good, as indicated by the new Menta Black Bay 41 models, which has a flush crown as well. So the crown on the 54 looks quite small. It actually measures 5.8mm in diameter and something like 2.6mm thick. So not that small, though it is thin, and it sits flush to the case. Either way, it looks much less pronounced than the 6.75mm crown on the 58, which is also more cylindrical due to finer teeth and stands about a half a millimeter off the case for an overall larger sense of scale. What I'm getting at is that crowns and pushers can actually be used as a visual point of comparison or reference for a case. Large crown and pushers can make a watch look smaller, so the opposite is true too. With the Black Bay 54, the watch as a whole looks a bit larger and more imposing because of this ratio. It also just looks more vintage because of the style of the crown, which, obviously works with the theme. It's interesting, Tudor used various tricks to make a small watch look larger, which is usually opposite of what we see. This reinforces the point that they weren't just trying to make a smaller dive watch. They were really cautious with proportions to make a watch that wore like the tool watch its forebearer was intended to be. There are two other dimensions I want to highlight that stand out in comparison to the 58 here. On both watches, the width of the bezel insert is about the same at around 4mm wide, but because of the reduced diameter, the bezel of the 54 looks thicker or bolder. Just as a thought experiment here, if you imagine two circles with the same line weight, one larger than the other, the smaller of the two will look bolder because of the reduced negative space. That's what's going on here. What this results in is a more compact and strong presence on the wrist than you would have had if Tudor had just scaled the bezel accordingly. It also makes the whole watch look denser than the 58. The last, I promise, tiny dimension I want to bring up is the very tip of the lugs. Yeah, this little part right there. On the 54, they're about 2.5mm wide. It's admittedly is a tricky measure to get, so grain of salt here. Well, on the 58, it's closer to 2 millimeters. Additionally, the bevel on the 58 is a bit wider. So the 54 is wider overall at the lug than the 58, which works even more towards making it feel bold, rugged, as well as, well, just not small. Okay, let's move away from the case for a moment and look at the rest of the watch here. The dial is nothing surprising. In fact, at a glance, you might say it's identical to that of the 58, just smaller. And you know what? You wouldn't be wrong, mostly. It's got a black surface with applied rose gold toned markers in the usual layout, encircled by a faux gilt index with logo and text and matching print. Sorry, no smiles here. The snowflake hour hand is still there. It's definitely not going anywhere. And it's matched with a straight sword minute hand. Here's the difference. The second hand has been switched from a snowflake to a lollipop. Watch jargon is pretty ridiculous, isn't it? Let's just reflect on that. Tudor suggested this is a change we'll see on other models moving forward, and it's already present on the Meta certified Black Bay 41, as well as the newer bezel-less Black Bays. The other difference I noticed is that the dial surface now has a subtle metallic sheen, where the 58 is pretty matte. It's not very noticeable, but it gives the dial just a touch more of like a literal depth to it. Look, it's a great dial. It's a classic, an icon. It's a sub. And while I wouldn't want to change the layout, I am growing a bit tired of the faux gilt coloring. Am I alone here? I don't know. It's very rich and coppery, and it's the exact same thing as on the 58 and on a 41mm model as well. I get that it's a reference to the gilt dials of the originals, but I guess I'm just ready for a change. I just want something new. I happen to really also like the warm off-white tone of the Black Bay Pro, and would just love to see the 54 or the 58 with the same treatment. And that also brings me to those great molded ceramic composite lume markers. They sort of split the difference between an applied and a pad printed style and go along with the vintage meets modern concept of the brand. Plus, they glow so damn well. I will say I did notice a slight shadow at the centers of the 10 and 11 markers on the 54 I've been wearing, which, isn't great. But that's not even a potential issue with the composite, as they are luminous throughout. Anyway, the biggest visual departure from the previous Black Bay model is in the bezel insert, which stays true to the 7922. It's an aluminum insert in black with numerals at the 10s alternating with slightly wider than expected rectangles. The triangle at the origin is left silver rather than the red from the 58. Frankly, that's a detail I won't miss. There's no minute graduations for the first 15, and the typeface is thinner, as well as a touch more rounded. It's a nice look, kind of stripped down and simple. At this point, I feel like I've seen every variation of vintage-styled bezel insert, so they aren't really surprising or striking. And this one is good. It works. It's a bit different, but, not really by much. All right, let's finally talk about how it wears. On the wrist, and I'll start this by saying that I genuinely like both the 54 and the 58 on the wrist. Yes, I'm double wristing. It's less like the 54 wears smaller and more like it wears denser. I don't look at it and feel like I'm wearing a size down. Just a different cut, like slim versus classic or whatever. Sure, it's literally smaller, but that's just not the takeaway. Looking from the top down, the 54 and the 58 both fit my 7-inch wrist, frankly, pretty perfectly. The 58 is a bit more angular and a bit more open. The 54, more square and compact. The 54 does look and feel a touch thinner, which I do think is a standout feature of the watch, though at the same time, the 58 is not thick at all. These are both just really great sizes. And this is what's so bizarre. I don't even feel like I'm wearing two different watches. I feel like I'm wearing variations on one watch. The same watch plucked from two different points in a timeline, which I guess is accurate. It's just odd to see them simultaneously. It's, very multiverse or something. And this leads me back to that point before about how these watches will coexist. I don't think they will for long, at least not in their current state. Let's just look at the facts. The Black Bay 54 has essentially the same technical specs as the 58 in terms of the movement. Inside is the MT5400, a chronometer certified automatic with a free-sprung silicone hairspring, 70-hour power reserve, 27 joules, and a frequency of 28,800 beats per hour. Solid movement. It's the same movement that you'll find in the Pelagos 39 and various other Tudor watches, including the bronze and silver Black Bay 58s. The Black Bay 58 seen here, the black one, has the MT5402. Same specs, but it's apparently a smaller movement. Odd, considering it's the larger of the two watches. Though that extra diameter is just in an extended base plate. The rest appears to be identical. Case and dial materials, they're the same. The depth rating, it's the same. The 54 is just a different size. But there's more. The 54 comes with a T-fit clasp. on either the bracelet or rubber strap options. This is not to be overlooked, as the ability to adjust the bracelet during the day is huge in terms of comfort. Once again, Black Bay Pro owner here, and I don't think I would have kept it around had that not been a feature. It's just too hefty of a watch. So assuming things are nearly identical, including looks, with one new and improved component, you'd assume they are either the same price or the newer one, the one with the better clasp, would cost more, right? Somehow it's $100 less, $38.50 on a bracelet versus $39.50. I don't get it. Why would you pay more for less? Of course, perhaps your wrist is larger or smaller than mine, leading you towards one diameter or the other. But if you're in the middle, like me, the decision comes down to subtle variations in style, a better clasp, and a slightly better value. Why Tudor doesn't make the clasp or a new bracelet available for the 58 is beyond me. But hey, I don't run a large Swiss watch company. It's not my business. The other thing that makes me question the existential status of the current 58 is that Tudor makes a lot of 39mm watches. There's the Black Bay Pro, the Pelagos 39, the Ranger, the bezel-less Black Bays in various colors, and of course, 5 Black Bay 58 variations. If you were to go into a Tudor boutique and see all of these options all around the same size, I think you'd be kind of overwhelmed. Instead, what you could have are the larger watches that are 41mm and up, the older Black Bays and Pelagos, then the new everyday watches like the Pelagos 39 and the Ranger. And then for the vintage enthusiast, the person that lusts for sub but either doesn't want to pay for one or just doesn't want to deal with vintage, you have the Black Bay 54 at a well-proportioned 37mm. What happens to the 58? Who knows? Maybe it's just had its run. Maybe Tudor will periodically bring out a new watch with the naming convention of Black Bay and X year, highlighting another piece from the archive, and retire the former version. Or maybe with their new facilities and pledge towards Meta certification, it will come back soon, new and improved, and hopefully with snowflake markers, fingers crossed. Predicting Tudor is a notably impossible task. Look, I know this review was sort of all over the place. Welcome to my brain. But I think the major takeaway, the actual conclusion to this review, is that Tudor has another home run on their hands. It looks great, it wears beautifully, it's a good value. If you like vintage divers, subs, or modern Tudor, it's gonna be hard to pass by. Is it what we expected? No. But perhaps it is what we've been waiting for. Another nod to the enthusiast, another acknowledgement that Tudor gets what we want. In my hands-on with the Black Bay 58 Blue, I touch on the saltiness from the community when that watch was launched, saying that it seemed like people felt they were owed something newer and perhaps even more esoteric than a 39mm vintage-inspired sub in blue. Well, you know what? Here it is. It's 37mm and it's great. Thanks for watching. Check out the written review on Worn & Wound if you want even more semi-coherent ramblings on Tudor. Hit like and subscribe if you don't mind, and I'll see you soon.